Welcome in, everyone. I'm SquishableMoon, your shooting star alien VTuber with a ranch addiction and fewer brain cells than your common garden snail. And welcome to my channel. Happy Valentine's Day, everyone. I hope you know that I love you very, very much, and I would still love you if you were a worm. That's right. I love you if you were a worm. I will add you guys all to my little dirt tank. You can be little worms in my little dirt tank, and we can all still be best buddies, okay? Anyway, today is going to be another AU from my My Little Pony series called The Forgotten Mark. The last video was turning Princess Twilight into kind of a changeling. So, Forgotten Mark syndrome is an illness that makes ponies believe their cutie mark or close friend's cutie mark have been switched with either another person's cutie mark or with a cutie mark that isn't their own. This illness can also make ponies believe their friends and family have been replaced by changelings. In the last video, Twilight was bit by a changeling who wasn't reformed, giving her the Forgotten Mark syndrome. It led to her fusing with Queen Chrysalis and ending up turning her into part changeling herself. She didn't die, nothing bad really happened, but now she has to deal with using changeling magic as well as her alicorn magic. We are going to be covering Rarity today, who is the element of generosity, and honestly one of my personal favorites. Rarity is both a fashion designer and a seamstress, which, oh my god, could you imagine doing both? Drawing is already hard enough, but she learned how to sew dresses as well. She does own her own shop in Ponyville called the Carousel Boutique, but by the end of the show, she'll have around 3 shops, I believe. One in Ponyville, one in Canterlot, and the last one being in Manhattan. Rarity does also have a little sister called Sweetie Belle, who adores her a lot and usually spends most of her time at Rarity's house instead of at their parents'. I don't know that much about Rarity's parents. We saw them, I think, in 1 or 2 episodes, but that's about all the information we have. Rarity also owns a white Persian cat named Opal Essence, who, while feisty, seems to adore being a little fancy spoiled cat by Rarity. I knew that I wanted to do Rarity next because she had grown a lot on me throughout the years. When I was younger, I really didn't like her very much because I felt like she was really bossy and selfish. However, I have come to really love her, not just because she's honestly a really well-designed character, but I believe she's actually an overall well-meaning and good character to have in the show. I know the fandom tends to think of Rarity as undeserving of her element of generosity because she tends to be kind of bratty, selfish, and sometimes self centered. I like to think that she fits her element pretty well. I mean, sure, she's selfish, yes, and a bit spoiled and dramatic, and can come off a little rude towards her friends at times. However, I think this is something that happens to all the main characters in the show at some point. At some point in the show, they do all kind of go against their element in one way or another. But I think when it really counts, when their friends need them, and when they truly need to use their element, they do. I mean, all of them have flaws in one way or another, but they still do use their element when it really counts. And I think the fact that sometimes they go against their element just shows that, they are actual three-dimensional characters and not just perfect characters that are always going to do the right thing at the right time. They all have flaws and quirks, and honestly, I think that's what makes them such good characters. Because let's be honest, Friendship is Magic was one of the best seasons we had ever gotten, at least in my opinion. I have seen a lot of the My Little Pony movies and shows and all that along the years, but I don't know, Friendship is Magic was just so different compared to all the other shows they had done, and it's honestly my favorite to this day. Rarity is also one of the most independent ponies of the main 6, in my opinion, going out into the world to follow her dreams of being a popular fashion designer. That's probably not easy. I'm not sure if her parents supported the idea of her doing that, but I think it's a really brave move of her because being an artist of any kind is kind of hard these days. Struggling, starving artists and all that. Not only just that, but she is well organized, creative, and smarter than a lot of us want to give her credit for. She is a business pony after all. Running her own shops while helping to save Equestria sounds like a lot of work. So, in my EU, Rarity has albinism, specifically type OCA1. Albinism is an inherited condition characterized in humans by the complete or partial absence of pigment in the skin, hair, and eyes. Albinism is also associated with several vision defects such as photophobia. The lack of pigmentation can make people more susceptible to skin burn and skin cancers as well. I tried to do some research about albinism. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. I looked up some TikToks and also looked it up on Google. I found that albinism, it's basically just a condition where you don't have a lot of pigment in your skin, and I believe melanin, I hope that's correct, melanin is the thing in our skin that gives us pigment. It just means they have less of it. I also found that people with albinism can have blue eyes and even blonde hair. Albinism seems to be a spectrum where different amounts of pigment can be in the skin. I also found that people with albinism do not in fact have red and purple eyes. The reason their eyes look red and or purplish, pinkish is because we are actually seeing through their eye and the blood is coming through their eye to make it look red, which I think is really interesting. So Rarity in my EU does dye her hair a lot, and she also got her love of fashion from having to cover up when outside. Because she has really sensitive skin, she often wears some kind of hat, scarf, or veil to cover her face and eyes when outside. Because albinism can affect eyesight, she sometimes wears her glasses and or contacts outside. The type of albinism she has means her hair is a whitish color and her eyes are a kind of dull blue instead of the more bright blue she has in the show. I also made her a little bit taller than the other ponies. I thought it would be very interesting for her to have more of a model look because I think Rarity would definitely be a model if she could. So, fitting her into the story, previously Twilight was hospitalized, and a lot of the responsibility fell onto the other main characters in the show, especially Rarity. Not only to protect everyone, but also to act in place of Twilight while she was getting the much needed care and rest she needed. Rarity, being the business pony that she is, also being really good at dealing with customers, was head of meetings and seeing guests from other kingdoms. During one of her meetings with a delegate from Saddle Arabia, she met a very nice stallion who is one of the princes from Saddle Arabia. At first, they absolutely could not stand each other and would end up arguing over the most tiniest of issues. They did have to meet a couple of times while they were there in Equestria. However, after the prince helped her figure out a few big issues they were dealing with in Equestria, they ended up starting to like each other. Their malice toward each other didn't just fade right away, but they did start to playfully tease each other instead of arguing and fighting. Sort of an enemies to lover kind of thing. Rarity was always one of the ponies that I felt like everyone assumed would have a boyfriend at the end of the show because she would often get crushes on other people in the show quite often. But don't get me wrong, Rarity does have standards for the ponies she wants to be with. But because of Rarity's personality, I really think she needs someone who can push her to do her best, inspire her, and help her go farther beyond what she thought she was capable of. Editing note really quick, I did want to also say that I am a Applejack and Rarity shipper. I think Applejack and Rarity make a really cute couple, and I kind of wish they had ended up together. I am totally fine with Rainbow Dash and Applejack ending up together, by the way, but I was just hoping that Rarity and Applejack would have gotten together. I imagine the Prince of Saddle Arabia being quite feisty himself, maybe just as stubborn as Rarity, but also extremely caring and generous. I think the prince would also be kind of hard to talk to at times, coming off as very cold or demanding. I think this is because of all the threats in Saddle Arabia. He had to grow up to be a very dignified and demanding ruler who was able to easily rule his kingdom because of how harsh it can be. Now, obviously, this prince character is completely made up. I don't really know much about Saddle Arabia except for the information we got in the show and that I found on Google, but it wasn't a lot. I also, by the way, have not read the comic, so I don't know if there's more about Saddle Arabia in the comics itself. I do also know there might be a movie that has a character from Saddle Arabia in it, but I have not seen it. I may draw this character at some point. I didn't draw him in this video just because I wanted to focus on Rarity, but if you guys are interested in me drawing this character with Rarity, I can totally do that. So the reason the prince had to visit Equestria to seek out Twilight for assistance from Saddle Arabia was because of an issue going on in Saddle Arabia that they could not handle by themselves. As we all know, there is a creature called the Wendigo in My Little Pony. I'm sorry for using the term Wendigo. That's just what they are called in the show. I know that there's a lot of controversy over using the word, but there's no way for me to get around it because that's what they're called in the show. I do apologize. So, similar to that of the Wendigos from the legend in My Little Pony, they are kind of like horse ghosts that bring cold and disaster whenever terror, fear, and mistrust take over. And the Wendigos can only be defeated with love and trust and all that stuff. So I'm going off of those. From My Little Pony, I kind of wanted a mythical, weird monster that they would have to face during this time. So instead of bringing cold and ice to all of the land, this monster would create a type of dust storm or sandstorm that could cover a whole town in darkness and fog. Although Saddle Arabia had a very good army force, they were no match for getting rid of them and needed the help of a lot of Equestria's unicorns. Because the kingdom was in a very sensitive spot with Twilight and the other princesses not being able to help, and being overwhelmed with the Forgotten Mark syndrome epidemic, Rarity would have to be the one to make the decision on behalf of the whole kingdom. Rarity had decided that her and a couple of other unicorns would go to Saddle Arabia to scout the issue and see if there was anything they could do. I think it would also be a nice customary gift if the prince would offer Rarity some fabric from their homeland to cover her skin, maybe offering her some fine silks. I did do some research on the topic of Saddle Arabia and saw that it was based off of Saudi Arabia in the Middle East. I didn't know much about the Middle East before making this video, so I did try to look up as much information as I could. I really enjoyed a lot of the clothes from the Middle East and a lot of the architecture. I liked the idea that they had to wear very modest clothing to cover themselves, and a lot of the intricate beading and embellishments were very beautiful to look at. I feel like Rarity would absolutely love this type of attire. With the fabric Rarity got from the prince, she would obviously make some beautiful gowns and clothes to wear on her trip to Saddle Arabia that fit in more with what everyone else was wearing. The prince would also invite Rarity to stay at his palace for the remainder of her trip there. So, because of the Forgotten Mark syndrome, I think this would start a chain of events similar to the Wendigos, where when the lack of friendship, trust, and love is present, bad things can happen. Similar to the Wendigos, the Forgotten Mark syndrome would make large amounts of confusion and fear. It would make mistrust, and people would start to think that basically their friends and family were not who they thought they were, thinking that they were changelings. And because of this, a monster appeared in Saddle Arabia, only making their condition worse. Because of the large amounts of emotion and fear, and specifically confusion, a new creature was emerging from the sand. And I like to imagine this creature as a ginormous sandworm, kind of like from the movie Dune. However, they themselves are also made out of sand. They can also control sandstorms and the weather inside the desert itself. These sandworms wouldn't be the only kind, and they could spawn in other places besides the desert, like the depths of the snow. You would have like giant snow worms made out of glaciers. They could control blizzards and destroy towns and freeze them. If it spawned in the mountains, you would have these giant mud worms that would control mudslides and rain. Rarity would come to find out this problem soon enough with the help of the prince. She'd be able to get enough information to send back to Twilight, who would be able to come up with a solution. Though they weren't sure how long Saddle Arabia could survive with the constant sandstorms. In the time they are waiting for Princess Twilight's letter to arrive, the prince and Rarity would become very close friends, hanging out almost all the time that they had there, going to shops, looking at spices, and even going to libraries together to research what was going on in any book that they could. Although a lot of people see Rarity as maybe less smart than the other characters in the show, I believe she's a lot smarter than the show lets on. I think that she would be able to research things perfectly fine, like Twilight, though I think she would find it kind of boring and also very stressful. Rarity is a very hard-working pony, and I think that would be something the prince would find admirable. And the fact that she's working so hard to help his people and also the people she wouldn't even know. He would find her generosity and care probably the best trait that she has. I think around the time Twilight would find a spell to kind of dispel the magic on the giant worms that were appearing. However, Rarity would have to be the one to cast the spell. The prince and her would take a couple guards and they would go out to the desert to find the worm and cast the spell together. However, I believe the spell wouldn't work and would only anger the worms more. Because of the spell not working, a lot of the other ponies would be dragged under the sand and, I guess, killed. They would disappear forever, basically, or they would become sand themselves. I believe that anyone who comes into contact with the sand monster could themselves become sand, so it would be kind of like sand mummies. Rarity and the prince would take shelter on a top of a very high rock to try and get away from the sandworms, who were basically going all around them. In this moment, I think the prince and Rarity would have a very heartfelt talk about their feelings for each other. I think the prince would lay all of his feelings bare to her, that he believed she was by far a better ruler than he ever could be, because of her generosity and kindness to do the right thing. He would say that he loved that she would always try and help others even when she didn't know if she could. And he would find her very admirable and selfless. He would tell her that his whole life had been a very confusing mess because he didn't think he was right to be the prince of his kingdom, that he didn't think he had what it took to be a ruler. But with her by his side, he wasn't confused or scared anymore of the role he was meant to play. And he wanted her to be in his life. During his confession, the worms would begin to fall apart and crumble to the ground, becoming more agitated, and the sandstorm would begin to go into a maddening rage. Rarity would confirm that she felt the same way about him, and they would embrace each other in a hug. A large, bright light would come from Rarity's horn, basically zapping them into a thin powder. I know it sounds a bit cheesy, but the power of knowing exactly who they were and what they wanted to do with their life, the certainty of their feelings for one another and love, is what stops the worms from taking over. Everyone knows about the magic of friendship and the magic of love. And in Rarity's case, it was definitely both she felt in the moment for the prince. A deep friendship with him, as well as feeling very secure in who she was, would give her enough power to completely get rid of the sandworm. I think out of everyone, Rarity has a lot more love and affection than we like to think. I believe she is very dramatic, and that makes her a very emotional person. And I believe she would be the type to become a ruler, even if she wasn't a alicorn princess. I think this would be a very good fit for her character, becoming a princess of Saddle Arabia through marriage. So, after the sandworm was vanquished, the prince and her sent a letter to Twilight telling them that they had found out how to get rid of the worm, although they would keep spawning as long as the Forgotten Mark syndrome was still there. Because the Forgotten Mark syndrome didn't exactly have a cure, Rarity decided to stay in Saddle Arabia for the time being with the prince. During this time, they would announce their engagement. I don't think they would get married right away. They would probably spend a couple years dating and also planning for a wedding, because let's be honest, if Rarity's gonna get married, it's gonna be a ginormous ordeal. She's gonna want to do everything as big as she can do. So that's basically what I have for Rarity. It's nothing as, I guess, complicated as Twilight's story. It's definitely not scary, but I thought it was a kind of interesting concept, especially because I felt like Rarity deserved to have more to her story. So Rarity basically becomes a princess in the show. So she's a princess, but she isn't an alicorn. I think it could be interesting if maybe if she gets married, maybe she could become an alicorn. But for now, I think she is fine as just a unicorn. I hope you guys enjoyed what I had to come up with. I know it might not have been as interesting as Twilight's story, but I think it came out pretty okay. I really enjoyed it. I hope you liked it. I will be doing another one, probably Pinkie Pie next. I'm not sure. We'll have to see. But with that being said, I'm SquishableMoon. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope all your dreams come true. See you guys next time. Bye bye.